My wife's death was the reason I got fired. Those words hit me like a punch to the gut, and they came from the man who gave me life, the one I spent my youth calling Dad. For nearly a decade, I poured my heart, trust, and every ounce of my energy into building his company, our family's company. From a small-time operation into a major player in the transportation industry, I gave it my all. But now at the lowest point in my life, after losing my wife, they didn't just turn their backs on me, they used my deepest pain as an excuse to cover their own failures. That was the moment I realized family isn't always a safe harbor. Sometimes the only way to save yourself is to walk away. Follow my story and let me know what you think about the choices I made along the way. My name is Gavin Whitmore. I'm 32 years old and currently the Chief Operating Officer at Carter Dynamics, a company specializing in supply chain management and transportation logistics. Like Carter Dynamics, my family once owned a business in the same industry. I used to believe I'd spend my life working in the family business, building my future there. But life doesn't always follow the plans we make, and sometimes the hardest blows come from the people we trust most. Even though a year has passed, the pain of losing my wife lingers like a wound that never fully heals. What's been even harder to move past is the betrayal by my own family. In the darkest days of my life, when I needed support, they chose to turn their backs on me, not just to walk away, but to push me out of their lives in the cruelest way possible. If there's anything that haunts me more than the day I lost the woman I loved, it's how my family used that moment of vulnerability to stab me in the back without hesitation. That's when I knew I had to learn to walk alone. It all started over a year ago. After 4 months of battling late-stage ovarian cancer, my wife Ella took her last breath, still holding my hand tightly. We met 3 years earlier at an industry conference in San Diego. Ella was an event coordinator, and I had just started managing a small division in my family's company. We clicked instantly, laughing, talking, and quickly realizing we'd found something special. After 2 years of dating, we got married, thinking life would unfold like it does for so many couples, falling in love, building a home, and maybe welcoming kids into a house filled with laughter. But life is never that simple. We found out about Ella's illness one morning in March. She collapsed in the kitchen while making breakfast. I rushed her to the hospital, thinking maybe she'd just been overworking. But then the doctor came out, his face heavy with sorrow, and delivered the diagnosis: late-stage ovarian cancer. She had about 4 months left. Those words shattered my world, like the ground had collapsed beneath me. All our plans, all our dreams, turned to ash. I tried to hide the truth from myself, convincing myself I had to stay strong and keep smiling as if nothing had changed. But Ella knew. She could look into my eyes and understand everything without me saying a word. In the days that followed, I spent every free moment by her side. I cut back on work, skipped meetings, and pushed aside anything that wasn't essential. We took more walks, cooked more meals together, and stayed up late talking, trying to hold on to every precious moment slipping through our fingers. Sometimes I wished it was all a nightmare I'd wake up from, finding Ella in the kitchen, laughing and pulling one of her silly pranks on me. I did everything I could, adjusting her treatment plans, getting her into the best medical centers I could find, clinging to the hope of a miracle. But as the doctors predicted, 4 months later she was gone. It was a quiet afternoon, sunlight streaming through the hospital window, draping her face like a soft blanket. Ella held my hand tightly and whispered through broken breaths, "Promise me you'll live well and find happiness again." My heart screamed to hold on to her, but I nodded and forced a smile, knowing it was the only way to let her go in peace. 3 days later, we held Ella's funeral. Almost everyone who knew us showed up: her parents, close friends, old colleagues, neighbors. They put their lives on hold and traveled long distances to say their goodbyes. But my family was noticeably absent. My father, Anthony Whitmore, and my brother, Jordan Whitmore, didn't show up. My mother, Lillian Whitmore, stopped by for about 10 minutes. She stood by the casket, laid down a wreath, and then found me in the crowd. When I asked where are Dad and Jordan, she shook her head and whispered so softly, I had to lean in to hear, "The company's busy. They couldn't make it." That excuse, if you could even call it that, felt worse than silence. Deep down, I knew they hadn't visited once during Ella's 4-month fight. Not a single message, not a word of support. That was the first time I truly understood that sharing blood doesn't mean they'll stand by you when you need them most. After the funeral, I returned to work. As I walked into the office, my team paused what they were doing. One by one, they approached me with a nod, a firm handshake, or a light pat on the shoulder. No fancy words, just honest gestures of sympathy that meant more than any speech could. Around 10, the internal phone rang, as I was buried in a pile of backlogged emails, trying to escape the weight of reality. My father's voice came through, cold and emotionless. "Come up to my office." Without a word, I set down my pen and went upstairs. When I stepped into the conference room, my father was already seated at the head of the table, with Jordan slouched lazily in the chair next to him. No one offered me a seat. No one even looked at me with a hint of sympathy. Before I could speak, my father said, "You're fired. Your shares will be reclaimed." I froze. He hadn't called me up to share in my grief or offer support. He called me up to fire me. It took a few seconds to find my voice. When I finally spoke, my throat was tight. "Why?" Without missing a beat, he replied, his voice as flat and cold as a judge's verdict. "Because you took a week off, the company lost a $200,000 contract." I felt my whole body go numb, but somehow I stayed calm. I answered slowly, each word measured. "You approved my leave. You said Jordan would cover things while I was gone." Right on cue, as if waiting for his moment to twist the knife, Jordan cut in, his voice dripping with arrogance. "Don't try to blame me, Gavin. Everybody's gotta own up to their mistakes." Before I could respond, my father turned to Jordan, then locked eyes with me, his voice sharp enough to cut. "Exactly. Don't blame Jordan. If you want to blame someone, blame your wife." I stood there, my heart pounding so loudly it drowned out everything else. I couldn't believe it. After everything I'd given them, everything I'd sacrificed, they swept it all away without a second thought. But it didn't stop there. My father kept going, each word cutting deeper than the last. "Your wife's death cost the company that contract. Your wife's death is the reason you got fired. If your wife hadn't died, you wouldn't have taken time off, and the company would have made a huge profit." The air in the room felt so heavy it could crush any sound before it formed. I stared at the man who had once been the symbol of everything I trusted in my youth, and realized I had never truly known him. It wasn't Ella's death that broke me. It wasn't the grief that made me want to collapse and sob. It was this moment, this brutal realization. In my family's eyes, my pain was nothing more than an inconvenient obstacle standing between them and their money. The anger inside me boiled over. I ground out each word, my voice trembling with the effort to hold myself together. "What the hell are you saying?" I stepped forward, planting my hands firmly on the cold surface of the table, locking eyes with my father. "My wife died, and you didn't say a damn word. Not once did you check on her. Not once did you visit, and now you stand here, dragging her name through the dirt to cover up your failures. Yours and Jordan's." Before the last word left my mouth, my father slammed his hand on the table. The sharp, violent sound echoed through the room, making Jordan flinch. "Enough," he roared, his voice raw and furious. "Get the hell out." Without hesitation, I reached up and tore off my employee badge, the same badge I'd once worn with pride, the one he'd personally handed me on my first day as an executive. I ripped it off and threw it onto the table, where it landed with a cold, final thud. Without looking back, I walked out of that room, out of the place I'd once thought would always be part of my life. In that moment, I knew I'd lost this family forever. I returned to my office, my steps heavy but resolute. I opened my locker and started packing my things. One notebook, one pen, one small framed photo of Ella, and me from the launch of a new project. Each item went carefully into a plain cardboard box. When a few team members noticed me packing, they looked up, their faces a mix of surprise and concern. One of them spoke, his voice hesitant. "Boss, Gavin, what's going on?" I gave a small smile and shook my head. There was no point in explaining. Suddenly, from across the room, Lincoln, an employee who'd worked closely with me for 2 years, called out, his voice thick with anger. "There's a termination email about Gavin. They're saying he lost a big contract because he took a week off." The room fell into stunned silence. Then another voice broke through, filled with outrage. "But his wife just passed away. That's ridiculous." Whispers spread quickly, and I watched as expressions shifted from shock to growing anger. A few minutes later, Lincoln stepped forward, his voice steady and loud. "If Gavin's leaving, I'm leaving too. I know exactly what Jordan's capable of. He's nothing but a useless hack." Before anyone could respond, Nolan, the project team leader, added firmly, "I'm out too." Right after, Brian, the head of strategic partnerships, calmly set his pen down and said, "Clear as day. Count me in. Each sentence felt like another crack shattering the false image this company worked so hard to maintain. I stood there frozen for a moment, my heart aching not because I'd lost a career I'd poured my soul into, but because of these people I'd mentored, fought alongside, who still chose to stand with me even when I had no power left to offer. I swallowed hard, gripping the box in my hands, and for the first time that day, I didn't know what to say. All I could think about was that cruel sentence, "Your wife's death is the reason you got fired." I could have forgiven them if the pain they caused had only been aimed at me. I'd once stubbornly told myself to look the other way, to believe blood ties could never truly break, but if they dared to insult Ella, the woman I loved most, who left this world in pain and loneliness, then even though she was gone, I'd never let them tarnish her memory again. In that moment, I made a vow to myself. I'd show them. The betrayal, the coldness, the cruelty they sowed would come back to them. I wouldn't scream or seek revenge with reckless fury. I'd repay everything they owed me with success, strength, and unshakable resolve. And when that day came, I'd stand before them with not a drop of pity in my eyes. Not because I'd become heartless, but because they chose this ending the moment they used my wife's death as an excuse for their failures. The next day, after a long night of reflection, I took a week off to travel. I needed time alone, a stretch of quiet to begin healing from Ella's loss, and to soothe the fresh wounds left by my family. For that entire week, I disconnected completely. No emails, no calls, no texts. Just me, a few unfamiliar cities, and endless roads where my sadness could dissolve into the wind. The week passed in a blur. When I stepped back into my house that afternoon, a familiar hollow emptiness washed over me. I tossed my suitcase into a corner, sank onto the sofa, and reached for my phone. The moment I turned it on, the screen lit up, flooded with missed calls, unread messages, and email notifications. The blinking blue light felt almost mocking, as if the world had moved on while I was frozen. I scrolled through the emails. Most were junk ads or belated messages from old colleagues. But then my finger stopped on a name I knew well, Matthew Carter. Matthew, a former friend and for 4 years, the fiercest rival to my family's company. Without hesitation, I opened the email. Inside was a single line, "Call me as soon as you see this." No explanations, no small talk. I dialed his number. The phone rang twice before he picked up. "Gavin," Matthew's voice came through, urgent but measured. "Are you free tonight? I want to take you to dinner. There's something important we need to discuss." I froze for a moment, then answered without hesitation, "Sure, just send me the address." After hanging up, I sat there, feeling a strange sense of anticipation stirring inside me, a sense that something was about to change. This time, I knew I had to be ready. That night at 7 p.m., I arrived at the restaurant Matthew had chosen. He was already there, 10 minutes early. When he saw me walk in, he stood and shook my hand, his eyes flashing with rare sincerity. We didn't dive straight into business. After a few brief words of encouragement, we shared dinner, chatting about trivial topics. When dessert arrived, I set my knife and fork down, looked at him, and got to the point. "So what's this dinner really about?" Matthew leaned back in his chair, his expression turning serious. "I heard you got fired." I gave a slight smirk, my voice tinged with sarcasm. "News travels fast, huh?" Not letting the silence linger, Matthew continued, his tone slow and deliberate, as if choosing his words carefully. "Because you're talented, Gavin. I'm willing to bet you've gotten no less than 10 offers from rival companies this past week." I just smiled, neither confirming nor denying. But from the look in Matthew's eyes, he already knew. A few seconds later, as if he'd rehearsed it, he leaned forward, his voice low but firm. "Come work for me. I'll make you chief operating officer. And here's the deal. You can bring your team with you. I'm not joking, Gavin. If you don't come with me, I'll make sure no other competitor touches you." As he finished, Matthew burst out laughing, a sharp, confident laugh that echoed through the corner of the restaurant. But behind the laughter, I could tell he was dead serious. I sat there for a moment, sipping my water, letting the offer roll through my mind. Sensing my hesitation, Matthew added, his voice softening, "You don't have to decide tonight. Think it over. Give me your answer in 3 days." I set my glass down, locked eyes with him, and said without a hint of doubt, "No need for 3 days. Draw up the contract. I'll be at your office first thing in the morning, as long as you keep your word. My team comes with me." For a brief second, Matthew's eyes lit up. like he'd just scored a major victory. 20 minutes later, we walked out of the restaurant together. Standing under the quiet night sky, I took a deep breath, feeling a real spark of hope for the first time in weeks. This time, I was starting over not for family, but for myself. The next morning, I arrived at Carter Dynamics at 8:00 sharp. The brand new office building stood out in the heart of downtown, not flashy but polished, professional, and impressive in every detail. As soon as I entered the lobby, I saw Matthew waiting. He walked over and gave me a firm handshake, his eyes shining with genuine trust. "Welcome home, Gavin." We headed straight for the elevators. On the way up, Matthew didn't say much. Maybe he understood I didn't need empty words right now. I needed action. When we reached the executive floor, he led me into a small private conference room already prepared for us. A thick contract sat waiting on the table, a sleek fountain pen placed neatly beside it. Matthew gave a small smile, his voice steady and sure. "I kept my word, you'll be our chief operating officer. Salary, benefits, and the clause allowing you to bring your team are all in there." Without hesitation, I picked up the pen and skimmed the terms. Every line on that paper felt like confirmation that I wasn't a pawn in someone else's game this time. It took me less than 10 minutes to sign everything. When I set the pen down for the final time, Matthew reached out and gripped my shoulder firmly. "I know you're not going to let me down." He stepped out of the room, leaving me alone with the freshly signed documents. I sat there for another minute, drawing a deep breath. A strange feeling washed over me. Not quite excitement, not quite relief, just a quiet, unshakable determination. The news that Gavin Whitmore had joined Carter Dynamics spread like wildfire through the logistics and transportation industry. By that morning, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. Message after message, call after call, email after email, all from former colleagues who'd once stood shoulder to shoulder with me at the family company. As I scrolled through my inbox, familiar names popped up: the chief engineer, the head of operations, the warehouse supervisor. Every message carried the same simple line: "If there's a spot for me, I want to come with you." Without a second's hesitation, I knew we were building something new, something unstoppable. In my heart, I made a list. There was no room for two-faced people, no space for those who only followed the shifting winds. I chose only those who stood by me, who believed in me when I had nothing left, those who valued loyalty over easy opportunities. That afternoon, Matthew and I held an emergency meeting. He chuckled with pure satisfaction when I handed him the list. "You've pulled together all the heavy hitters from back in the day, Gavin. You're bringing a championship team here." I responded with a brief smile. No need for big words or boasting. We both knew this team would be the foundation for something massive. The next day, the internal interviews were quick and straightforward. No screening rounds, no complicated tests. Just one simple question I asked each of them: "Do you still trust me enough to fight by my side again?" Not one hesitated. Every handshake was firm, every glance filled with certainty. We, those who'd been cast aside, doubted, and underestimated, would rebuild from the ruins others had left behind. The days that followed passed in a blur, with news of my move to Carter Dynamics spreading, and the reputation I'd built over the years. I barely had to lift a finger to attract business. When clients heard I was no longer with the family company, it became clear that the relationships I'd spent years cultivating weren't tied to the Whitmore name. They were tied to me. No cold calls, no sales emails. One by one, major clients, the same partners who'd trusted me through countless projects, began pulling away from my old company. Contracts were canceled, partnership proposals withdrawn, meetings postponed indefinitely. It all happened within a month of my departure. I didn't feel smug. I didn't celebrate, but I didn't feel sorry either. When my family chose betrayal, they severed the ties to the greatest value I'd ever brought them. Now they were reaping what they'd sown. 2 months later, on a late evening as I was tidying up paperwork to head home, my phone rang. When I glanced at the screen, the name made me pause: Anthony Whitmore. A small, cold smile crossed my face. I knew this call was coming, sooner or later. I answered without rushing, my voice steady. "What do you want, Dad?" His voice came through, a little strained. "Gavin, we need to talk." I stayed silent, calm, waiting for him to get to the point. A few seconds later, as if reading from a script, he spoke, his tone carefully measured. "Would you consider coming back? The company's struggling. We need you." I said nothing, just waited, letting him fill the silence. His voice dropped, a rare trace of urgency creeping in. "I'm willing to offer you 30% more than what Carter Dynamics is paying, and your shares they'll be reinstated. I closed my eyes briefly, letting the emptiness settle within me. Promises, belated offers, all of it was meaningless now. I lifted my gaze to the city lights, shimmering outside the window, and said slowly, "Do you remember what you said to me that day?" The line went silent. No excuses, no sighs, just heavy, undeniable silence that spoke louder than words. In that moment, I knew with absolute certainty that everything between us had ended long ago. Today was just the day we finally said it out loud. I thought they'd get the message after that call and leave me alone, but I was wrong. The next morning at 7 a.m., the doorbell rang, loud and relentless. I was in the kitchen making coffee when it started, the sound dragging on until I set my mug down and walked to the door. When I opened it, my mother stood there looking worn down and broken, her face streaked with tears, her hands trembling as if clinging to a last shred of hope. The moment she saw me, she rushed forward, her voice shaking and choked with sobs. "Gavin, please come back. The family needs you. I'm begging you." I tightened my grip on the doorframe, keeping my voice calm. There was no anger left in me, only a cold, heavy stillness. A warning from a former colleague flashed through my mind, someone who'd secretly messaged me. "Be careful. They only want you back to save the company. Once it's stable, they'll throw you out again, just like before." I didn't need more proof. I took a deep breath, lifted my head, and looked directly at my mother, the woman who'd once held me in her arms, now standing before me like a desperate negotiator in a one-sided deal. My voice dropped, colder than it had ever been. "That's enough, Mom." She looked up, startled, tears streaming down her face. I stepped fully onto the porch, my voice firm and unshaken. "I know everything. I know the company's collapsing. If I return, when things are fixed, you'll push me out again, just like last time." She opened her mouth to deny it, but I raised my hand, cutting her off. "Save it. Last time I lost everything because I believed in family. It's not happening again." I pulled out my phone, holding it up between us, and said steadily, "I've already filed for a restraining order. Starting today, you, Dad, and Jordan are not allowed within a single step of me. If you keep harassing me, the police will get involved." She froze, her face draining of color, her mouth moving silently as if to plead, but I'd already turned back inside. The sound of the door closing behind me echoed heavily through the house. A final, resounding end. I leaned against it, closing my eyes for a few seconds. No more pain, no more anger, only freedom. Without me, the family company spiraled out of control. Within months, major contracts were canceled, old partners turned their backs, and key personnel walked out the door. Jordan and Anthony sank deeper into the wreckage they'd created for themselves. I didn't care. I didn't track their downfall step by step, but the news still reached me through friends, business partners, and cold, detached business articles. One evening, as I sat on the balcony nursing a glass of whiskey over melting ice, my phone rang. I wasn't surprised when I saw the name flash across the screen, Jordan Whitmore. I hesitated for less than a second before picking up. The moment the call connected, Jordan's voice exploded through the speaker, filled with rage. "This is all your fault." His words hit like a slap, but I stayed still, my gaze calm and steady as a quiet lake. After a single breath, I lifted my glass, took a small sip, and replied, my voice cold as steel, "I built it up, and I can tear it down." On the other end, Jordan froze, speechless. I hung up without hesitation, not giving him a chance to respond. I leaned back in my chair and looked up at the starry night sky. There was no sense of triumph, no feeling of victory, just the inevitable end, the price they had to pay for their greed and betrayal. 2 weeks ago, on a late afternoon, the doorbell rang suddenly. I was in the middle of reviewing some reports when the sound broke my focus. I stood, walked to the door, and opened it cautiously, half expecting another unwanted visitor. Instead, I was revising new operational plans when the doorbell rang. I frowned, not expecting anyone that day. Walking to the door and opening it, the sight that greeted me made me want to slam it shut. Anthony and Jordan stood there, pale and disheveled, far from the proud, self-assured men they once were. Their eyes avoided mine, but their clenched fists betrayed their desperation, as if clinging to the last scraps of dignity they had left. I crossed my arms over my chest, leaning casually against the doorframe, my voice cold as ice. "What do you want?" Anthony cleared his throat, his eyes darting nervously as he searched for words. Gavin, your brother and we need your help. I didn't answer, just raised an eyebrow, waiting. Jordan stepped half a pace forward, his voice rough and shaky. We know this house. You repurchased it when you were working for the family company. Technically, it was with the family's help. Dad and I hoped you could sell it and use the money to save the company. I let out a short, sharp laugh that froze the air between us. Before they could offer more pitiful excuses, I spoke, my voice low and cutting, each word like a blade. If you don't want to deal with the police, I suggest you get off my property within 30 seconds. Jordan panicked, raising his hands, his voice trembling. Wait, Gavin, just hear us out. If not selling, then maybe just a loan. A small one. We need $50,000 to start over. Anthony chimed in, desperate. That's right, Gavin. Just 50 grand. It's nothing to you now. We're family, aren't we? Family helps each other in hard times. I clenched my fists, holding back the anger surging inside me. An image of Ella flashed through my mind, her pale face on the hospital bed, her fragile hand gripping mine as she said goodbye. I looked at the two men before me, my voice dropping to a deadly calm. You want my help? I stepped forward, close enough that they couldn't hide from my gaze. Fine, I said slowly, emphasizing every word. Go to the cemetery, kneel at my wife's grave, beg her for forgiveness for everything you did to her. I paused, then finished, my voice sharp and final. If she forgives you, then I will too. Anthony and Jordan stood frozen, stunned into silence. Neither could say a word. I calmly closed the door in their faces, hearing their hurried footsteps retreat down the driveway. I leaned against the door and closed my eyes. Inside the quiet house, there was no more anger, no more pain, only the peace that comes when you reclaim your self-respect. If you're still here listening to my story after all this time, I want to say thank you for staying with me. I know this journey hasn't been easy to hear, and even harder to accept, because sometimes the deepest wounds come from the people we once loved most. When I walked away from my family, from the company I thought would be my life's work, I carried a lot of guilt. There were nights I asked myself, was I wrong? Was I too cruel to turn my back like that? But with time, I realized enduring isn't always loving, and sacrificing isn't always noble. Some families, some relationships are hollow shells, rotten inside long before we're willing to admit it. If you keep clinging to them just because of the word family, or a sense of duty, the person you lose will be yourself. So if you find yourself stuck in a toxic family, a rotting company, or a relationship stripped of respect, give yourself permission to choose differently. Choose to step into the light. Choose yourself. Choose your dignity. Don't look back, and don't mourn what was never truly worthy of you. If anyone ever asks me, if you could do it all over again, would you make the same choice? I'd answer without hesitation. Yes, I'd still walk away, and I wouldn't look back. Before I end this story, I want to ask those of you still here, listening until the very last moment, if you were in my shoes, facing a family willing to cast you aside the moment you fell, betrayed at your weakest, what would you do? Would you keep enduring, trying to patch things together, or would you walk away, protect yourself, and never look back? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I genuinely want to hear what you think. If this story touched even a small corner of your heart, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, hit like, and share it with others. Your support means more than you know, and it keeps me going, telling honest stories like this one. Thank you for staying with me until the very end. I'll see you on the next journey.